Well, good morning. Welcome on I guess it's raining just a little bit Sunday morning, but we'll take that right now, right? We've been getting so much rain. Bob, are you finding workbooks back there? No. Okay. All right. So maybe we're out of workbook. So I apologize if you do not have one, but I promise we will try to make it where you can follow along as best we can. We're going to be studying, open, if you'll open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 15. We're going to be finishing up Exodus 15 through 18 this morning. Should have gotten through most of that on Wednesday night with Max. Of course, Max was here with you Wednesday. I had to step out and go teach a class at the last minute, and he had to go step out and teach a class this morning. So Max is in the back today, and I'm here. Wednesday is singing night, just so you know. And then next Sunday morning, we'll be back together. Next Sunday morning, we'll be beginning the last month of our quarter here together in the book of Exodus. And our plan is, just so you know, next quarter, if any of you want to stick with it, we're going to continue on studying from this series with Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in some form or fashion. Haven't exactly figured out how we're going to fit all three of those 23 class periods. Still working on that. That's important. All right, before we get started, let's pause and let's have a word of prayer. Our God and our Father in heaven, we come to you this morning. We're thankful for this day. We're thankful for this time that we can come together and study your word. Pray, Father, that you will be with those of our number who are hurting this morning. We have those who have lost loved ones. Pray you will be with them, particularly the Collins family. We pray, Father, that you will be with our brother David Rogers as he continues in the hospital. Doctors will be able to take care of his needs, bring him back to us soon. We study these words this morning. It's our prayer, Father, that we will make application in our lives, that we'll grow closer to you. Pray all these things in Jesus. All right, so Wednesday night, you guys got into lesson 9, Israel between the sea and Sinai. So by way of review, just quickly remind us what we talked about on Wednesday night. Yep. That's right. God led Pharaoh into a trap, even though Pharaoh thought that he had the children of Israel trapped near the Red Sea. But of course, they crossed over on the dry land. Now they get over. They're in between the Red Sea and Sinai, and here they are. And then what do they begin to do? They begin to complain. What was their problem? They needed water. They didn't have any water. They had been 3 days without water. And so God, what did he do? He listened to them and he provided for their needs, right? Provided for their needs. And so remember, there was the log that was tossed into the water that made the bitter water sweet. So then they had water to drink. And so now that their thirst is gone, they realize what? We're hungry, and God's not providing us anything. And so God hears them, and what does God do? He provides manna, right? He provides manna from heaven for them. And the manna would come in the morning, and they were to go out, and they were to collect what? It was called what? One omer, right? One omer, which was 1 day's worth of manna, not to collect any more than that. 1 omer per person, right, that they could collect. And they weren't to collect any more than that. And then on the 6th day, they were to collect how much? They were to collect double. Why? Sabbath, making preparation for the Sabbath, because that wouldn't come on the Sabbath. That manna wouldn't come on the Sabbath because they were given provision to take care of that the day before. But then that wasn't good enough, right? What did they complain about next? No meat. We need some meat. We can't just live on this bread. We need some meat. And so, of course, God once again listens to them, and he causes what to happen? Yeah, the quail fly into the camp and land, and they're able to get quail, and now they've got quail and manna to eat. And so you talked about, of course, on Wednesday, all of the provisions that God made. So what would happen if they collected too much manna? Maybe they got a little greedy and they collected too much manna. What would happen? Yeah, it would be full of worms and it would stink, which is interesting because that's what would happen on Friday morning to everything that was left over. But on Saturday morning, everything that was left over stayed fresh. It was just fine. So again, God showing his hand being in what he's doing here to the people. I mean, as if it wasn't enough that they just wake up and something they have never seen before in their life is on the ground and it is good for food. God further shows them that he is in control by this minor difference in how they're supposed to uh, care for themselves on the Sabbath day and what happened. Yes, about salt. Yeah. And, and salt, we use salt to flavor our food more than anything, right? But in previous generations, salt was a preservative. But in this case, was it salt that was the preservative? It was God, right? It was God's hand that was a preservative. Because if it had been the salt or if it had been the people, they could have just done that, taken care of it. The next morning, everything would have been fine. But no, God didn't allow for that. So God was the provider here. He was the preservative or the spoiler, depending on the situation, depending on how they followed His will. That's what happened. And so here God was the one performing this act. And that was studied, and then I had written in my note just something interesting that I had read and that I've known my whole life. And yet it just struck me again as I was reading the fact that God provided for the children of Israel in the wilderness for 40 years. For 40 years. I mean, I'm 49 years old. So that's most of my life that God would have provided for them. Now, as a small child, my parents provided for me. I don't know, my mom cooked every meal. I didn't do really anything for myself, right? To get food. It just showed up at the table at dinner time, right? Now it wasn't a miracle. Somebody was doing something, but I was provided for. Okay? I think about my little granddaughter. When she's hungry, she just cries. And Bailey and Vincent know, oh, that means go fix the bottle. She's hungry. And if she doesn't get enough, she cries some more. But she's completely at their mercy as to whether or not they feed her what she wants when she wants. But she can't do for herself. Okay? And these children of Israel were at God's mercy. Yet, when we get a little older, we don't just cry, right? We go, hey, Mom, I'm hungry. And we expect that Mom's going to do something about that, right? Mom or Dad's going to take care of us. They're going to give us food to eat. Okay? When you're this long, you don't know anything but cry, right? Cry out. But eventually you grow out of that, don't you? Start to trust that at the right time of the day, Mom's going to take care of you. You go off to school, you start to trust that when you open your little Toy Story lunchbox, that there's something in there, something healthy, something good for you, right? And yet these children of Israel, here they are in the wilderness. And listen, my mom and dad are here today, so I have to be real nice, okay? But I never doubted that my mom and dad would take care of me food-wise, okay? But boy, children of Israel should have really never doubted that God was going to take care of them, okay? It might have felt like my mom was having to perform some miracles at time, when dad was on strike and maybe there wasn't as much money around the house, but the truth is that never happened. There was the grocery store, there was wherever we went to get food. These children of Israel, it was on the ground. He just had to walk out and pick it up. God showed them that every day for 40 years. And how many years did it take for them to finally trust in God and quit complaining? they never reached that point, did they? They never became content and trusting fully. Yes. Okay. Yeah, and I should have said that the manna, when I talked about God providing the manna, God provided the manna for 40 years. But yeah, I think you're right on the quail. I don't believe that was a daily. Yeah. Clarence, listen, I want you to hear this. Clarence said quail's kind of dry to eat. Clarence, see, that just proves that some of us would have complained if we would have been there. See, we think we're above that, but Clarence just proved that's not true. Sorry, Uncle Clarence, I had to pick on you a little bit. Go ahead. Yeah. Shoes, other ways God showed, right? We talked about that. Was that last Sunday maybe about the shoes? That in 40 years their shoes never wore out, right? Their clothes, they just lasted. God provided for them, ma'am. That's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they did these things, but yeah, they might have made them, yeah, as they passed them down. And the hand, I don't know exactly how all of that went, but we do know this: God provided for every need, didn't He? He provided for every need. And that's such a small detail. The idea that their shoes never wore out and such. Because you think, like you said, they had cattle; they could have made more, and that wouldn't have been. So why the detail that it never wore out? It's just interesting there that God just showing how He provided for His children. And we're going to talk about. I think this is going to come in lesson 10, but where God just talked about the fact that they would be His chosen people, and He would be faithful to them if they were faithful to Him and obedient to Him in every way. And it began with just, for the most part, they haven't had to do a whole lot yet except listen. Remember at the battle when Pharaoh's army was coming, Moses said what? Just watch and be silent. Watch and see. Be silent. You're not going to have to raise a hand to defeat Pharaoh's army. You just have to watch the power of God and what He's about to do. And that's been the case for the children of Israel most of the time. They haven't had to do anything to this point. And yet now they're given a few things that they have to do. Minor things, Lester, like they've got to go out and just pick up an omer full of manna and not any more or not any less. Not a hard thing to do. And yet some of them did what? They didn't follow it, did they? Yeah. And that's a great point. Instructions are important, aren't they? Instructions have always been important to God. Always been important to God. And in our culture, we just think, well, there's manna on the ground. God doesn't really care what we do. As long as we're thankful that God would provide, He doesn't care what we do with it. No, God always cared exactly. And He's always told the people what He wanted exactly. And instructions are important. They were important for the children of Israel as it related to manna on the ground, and they're important to you and I as it relates to our salvation. Instructions matter, and that's why we've got to study this book, because God has given us specific instructions on how to take advantage of His grace and to save our souls. We need to be attentive to that. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So Phyllis says, sometimes they didn't follow instructions. God spoiled their manna. He put a little worm. He put some worms in there. Sometimes they didn't follow His instruction, and He struck them dead. I'm kind of glad God doesn't strike me dead today, right? Because I like the second chances. I like the second opportunities, the opportunities to repent and to recognize the error of my way when that happens. And so I'm thankful for that. And but certainly what it does teach us, and we're going to look at that in just a minute as we look at this First Corinthians passage where it talks about just that, what this should mean to us, reading these stories and how we should apply them, or how Paul says it should be applied. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and certainly there is an aspect of that. I agree, as pointed out with it, that God they're do without, and that they have to ask. Okay, it does show their reliance, their dependence on Him. And what was wrong really with it? Was it the fact that they asked for food when they were hungry, or when they were thirsty? It was more their attitude, right? The way they went about it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, God teaches some lessons, doesn't He? And sometimes He teaches some lessons very harshly, as we as parents sometimes teach the lesson more harshly than others, because sometimes a lesser way of getting our point across is enough, and then sometimes it's not. And yeah, you're right. As parents, we get frustrated with our children sometimes. We get frustrated with our spouses sometimes, don't we? Don't make that face, Amy. Sorry, Jared, you can't see up there. Yeah, no, we do, right? Sometimes we get frustrated with our spouses, with our children, with one another, right? And we act out a certain way, maybe. But the children of Israel, wow, they just. And again, I joked with Clarence this morning, saying, okay, he said the quail was dry and whatever. But listen, isn't that really the truth about all of us? We're not pointing the finger at the children of Israel and saying, you guys, just what were you thinking? Because we do the same thing. We're not very good at pointing out our own faults sometimes. We're not very good sometimes at recognizing that we do the same thing as they do in many ways, but we do. As we say, it starts, we see it very plainly in our children, but really sometimes we're no different, are we? When we get that way with our spouse or with our brethren, we're really just doing the same thing and in the same way, and yet we're not as good at recognizing that in ourselves. So we got to be careful pointing the finger. But we also have got to do what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10, and that is look at these stories and learn the lessons that God intended for us to learn by recording these messages for us in the Old Testament. I thought I saw one more hand. Yes. Yes. God has given us a straight path, as Larry points out. That's a great, great thing. He knows, though, that we stray sometimes, and so He's given us avenues to get back on the straight path. But it is our responsibility, isn't it, to try to stay on that straight and narrow. But yeah, these children of Israel, they complained over and over and over again. And so, what is written about them? Let's look into our lesson. This is going to be question number 18. I believe this is where Max said you left off, question number 18, but it pertains to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. I know the question says 1 through 3, and if you only read 1 through 3, you would have put a question mark in your book like I did, okay? But when you realize it's 1 through 13, it makes it a little easier to answer this question. So look in your Bibles in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and I'll begin reading in verse number 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with your temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So our question here is, what point is Paul making from this story in 1 Corinthians chapter 10? What is the point Paul is making? Yes, sir. Okay? Christ is our rock. We've got to follow him. What he taught. Very good. What else? What else do we learn here from this passage? Idolatry. Yep. That's very good. They fell into idolatry, didn't take advantage of their newfound freedom. I like the way you said that. Yes, brother. Yeah, that's right. Learn the lesson. Learn the lessons that somebody else already made these mistakes, and we saw what happened to them, right? And listen, God is not going to strike us dead today for a decision. Okay, He's not going to strike us dead, but it certainly tells us how God feels about that matter. So it wouldn't surprise us when we read where God talks about eternal punishment for those that do not obey His will. That shouldn't surprise us, or we shouldn't think that to be harsh. I mean, God has shown how He dealt very harshly and very seriously with those who did not obey His will. Somebody says, "Well, I don't like that. That doesn't sound very comforting this morning." Well, it may not be, but it's God's truth. And I'm not necessarily trying to make you feel comfortable this morning. We want to save souls, don't we? We want to be comfortable in heaven with God one day, and that's why we talk about these things. Yes, sir. Yeah. And is he talking to a group of people who were familiar with evil things? Yeah, the Corinthians, remember, the Corinthians, there's just a whole list of things that the Corinthians had been guilty of. And so I even use the term, remember, as he lists all of those things, all of those evils, he says, such were some of you. Such were some of you. So he's talking about people who struggled with these things. And that's why he's telling them, hey, learn the lesson. Learn the lesson from the story of the Israelites. Yeah, yeah, pillar in the fire was with the children of Israel every day, right? We'll read the story of God speaking to them, and then in their presence, we'll see that coming up in our next lesson. And we say, well, God was there, and they had Moses, the mouthpiece for God, as he told them exactly what it was that God wanted. Well, this is our pillar. This is our fire. This is our mouthpiece of God. Everything's right here. And the question is, will we heed the lesson, or will we cast it aside as the children of Israel did? Yeah, yeah. Study to show thyself approved. Right. And so we need to open up our Bibles and we need to study these things. Any other questions, comment about this? Yes. Now, the devil's always at work. Yeah. The devil's always at work. We see that in the Old Testament too, very plainly in stories like Job and how he was working. Yeah. 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 Questions, comments, anything else before we move along? Yes. Yeah. Search daily. Make sure we're right. And not Sunday and not Wednesday night when we're here, right? But daily, every day. Because we're much more susceptible to the dangers and the temptations of this world on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday, Saturday, maybe Wednesday, I guess. But listen, we're in the safest place we can be right now. We are the most protected from sin that we can be in these walls. Why? Because we're surrounded by people that want to do the right thing, that want to serve God. And so as long as we all keep that direction and that attitude, then we're in a safe place, aren't we? The world, though, is a dangerous place to be with everything going on, and we want to learn the lessons from the Israelites. Let's skip down to our next question, and question number 19 talks about the who defeated Israel at Rephidim. I may not be saying that right, but you can see right down here at the bottom in our map. Remember, again, this most likely being the place where the children of Israel crossed over the Red Sea, and then they've gone down now through Marah and through Elam, and they're down here now at Rephidim, right down here now near Mount Sinai. And I don't know, that looks to be, if you look at the scale here, that looks to be, what would you say, maybe 120 or 150 miles down south from where they crossed over the Red Sea, which would have been quite a trek for these children of Israel. It gives you some idea. We read these things one after another the way they're recorded, but it gives us some idea about the amount of time that is passing, right? There's been time as they traveled down, there's been time for these stories to go around about what God did for the children of Israel. In our last lesson, we read that some of the nations had heard these stories, and what did they do? They were frightened. They feared God. They feared the children of Israel because what God had done for them. And now here, they get down here to Rephidim, and we're going to find out that someone comes out to attack them. Someone decides, hey, I'm going to go on the offensive. Now, why go on the offensive against the children of Israel here? Say that again. Yeah, they probably didn't want the Israelites to be, they were fearful that they might want to come into their nation or take their area, right? And that they would cause problems. And so perhaps that's the reason they come out and they attack them here. And they might think that they're weak. They might think they're disorganized. And certainly, was the children of Israel, were they good warriors at this point? No. Yeah, they've always been slaves. They didn't have an army. They weren't prepared to be warriors. And so strategically, this might have seemed like a good time to attack them. The problem was they weren't just attacking the children of Israel. Who were they attacking? They were attacking I Am. They were attacking the Lord, God in heaven. That's who they were attacking. And so God was on their side. God had already shown he was on the Israelite side. And so who was it that came out to attack? Amalek. Okay, Amalek, the Amalekites. So who was Amalek? This wasn't in the book, so nobody knows the answer to this, right? Come on, somebody knows the answer to this. Who was Amalek? If you don't, I do, because I looked it up. Share it with you. Anybody want to give this a shot? So Amalek was the grandson of Esau. Okay, so Amalek was the grandson of Esau, and so um, we do know that the Israelites would have long-term battles from people that they wouldn't take care of as they went into the land of Canaan, and they would continue to have these battles and these problems with these nations. This is a nation, however, that as we go on to read, we see that God says He's going to wipe them from memory, right? He's going to wipe them from memory. God's going to show His power against this people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they may have had as much or more wealth than Egypt, right? Because they took all of this gold and silver, as we've already studied. They plundered Egypt. Yeah. They took all of this out, and all of these herds, all of their herds, which had been spared from all the plagues. What happened to all the Egyptian herds? They all died during the plagues, right? And so they had, as you said, they were a rich people in that they had all these herds, they had this gold, they had this silver, and I think Max just pointed out the other day, just hundreds of pounds, right, of these of gold and silver. Yes. Yeah. 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 I've been I won't say reading because it's an audio book, but about the Comanche Indians and just their plight, the Empire of the Summer Moon. I think somebody here put me onto this book, 16, 18 hours. So that's what I listen to on the way to and from work a lot of times. But it's just fascinating where it talks about their movement of all of their people and just even of course they were very good at not being tracked, and yet there were such small bands, in the hundreds maybe, uh, and as they would travel through. But talk about 2 million people plus animals, yeah, cattle and whatever else it may have been, sheep, whatever it was, just this would have just eaten the grass up as they would have gone along. Yeah, it must have been an amazing sight. That 10,000-foot view of that might not even have given us the whole picture, right? I mean, if you really think about that, I believe they say there's about 4 million people who live inside of Loop 610 in Houston. Okay, and you think about if you've ever been in a plane flying into Houston at 10,000 feet, you can't even see but just a portion of that, right, at a time. I like my window seat, so I look out, and of course you could see a lot of area, but uh, to think about 2 million people, uh, potentially 2 million people. Yeah, yeah, yeah. As a quarter of a million people try to get out, and yes, exactly. Yes, sir. There wasn't much traffic either. Well, there weren't any highways either, though, right? So yeah, there wasn't much traffic except for the unless you were in the back of the 2 million line, right? Right up here, yes. Then I'll come back. Yeah, I mean, it would seem that they didn't eat their animals, right? Because they didn't have any food. They were hungry. I mean, they have all this cattle, but they didn't do that, right? They didn't. They wouldn't have eaten those, right? Good point. Yes, ma'am. Amalek came out. Yeah. Yeah, Esau's descendants would be a long-term thorn in the Israelite side. And I don't know if exactly we're told really why this happened, but we are told what happened, aren't we? And so here, as this battle is about to take place, who is it that Moses appoints to be? Edwin uses the term general as he wrote the material. Who does Moses appoint to be the general of the army that would go and fight? Joshua. What's significant about Joshua in being chosen here? Yeah, it was really just the beginning, was it, of his career, we call it, or whatever. He would be the one we know who would take over from Moses. He would actually be the great leader that would lead the children of Israel into the promised land once Moses was not allowed to lead the children of Israel into promised land. And yet, here he is being appointed by Moses very early on to be the leader of the people here. Yeah. He'll be one of the two spies that say we can take the land as opposed to the 10. A study we'll be having next quarter where we'll be looking at that. But yes, absolutely, Joshua. Uh, what did Joshua early on here had demonstrated what about himself? Obviously, his ability to what? His ability to be a leader. I don't know what he had done to this point, but whatever it was, he had obviously demonstrated to Moses his ability to be a leader. And so as I was thinking about that, I just thought to myself, leaders lead long before they're given the title or the appointment to be a leader, right? You know, when we look around and we need a deacon in the congregation to take care of a specific task, and it becomes time to appoint deacons, it's pretty easy to look out and say, well, you know what? Who has shown themselves to be a servant, right? This man or that man, he shows himself to be a servant. He wasn't appointed a certain task, but he was certainly served the congregation. He's already shown his ability to lead, and therefore it becomes a pretty easy decision to appoint him into a position where he has to lead or to serve, in this case, as a deacon. And so leaders, you know, even if we looked out among this congregation today, we have men in this congregation and we have women in this congregation who do a great deal of work and put together a great deal of effort of service to other people in the congregation, and they don't hold a title. Leaders lead with or without a title. And here, long before Joshua was appointed as being the leader of the children of Israel to lead them in the promised land, he is leading. And so or the next question was, describe the spectacular nature of the battle. What happened here in this battle? Yeah. Moses stood up on the hill overlooking the battle, and as long as he held his hands up, they were winning the battle. But he would get tired and his hands would drop, and when his hands would drop, what would happen? The Amalekites would start to take over. Amalek would then start winning the battle. And so his hands would be lifted up again to a point where they finally realized we got to keep Moses' hands in the air. And so they propped his hands in the air to make sure they would stay high. Why? Why hands in the air? God said, do it. It's once again, what's God demonstrating? His power, right? Look, it's not you children of Israel, you untrained army that are down there defeating this army of men, right? It's the power of God. And we live in a nation that's full of ugliness at times. But we live with the power of God. And we get on Facebook and we argue with one another about stuff we can't change. And then we get at odds with one another because you like this and I like this, and we get in arguments over these little things. It's silliness. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we forget that we are in a battle together under the power of God. And God wins. We talked about that in our last lesson. God wins. We already know the answer to the question. We don't need to get embroiled in silly little things that don't matter. We need to get involved in loving one another and supporting one another and lifting one another up in the most important thing, in the most important battle, and that is our battle with Satan, so that together together we make it to heaven. That's what's important. That's what's important. And so God's showing them that here is, look, this is my power. I'm on your side. Again, even though you've been grumbling and complaining against me, you're my people. And he'll continue to reiterate that as we'll see in the next lesson. You're my people. I chose you if you'll choose me. That's what he tells them. And he's showing his great power here by, as long as Moses lifts the hands, they're going to win the battle. And then once the battle is over, what instruction is Moses given in Exodus chapter 17, verses 14 through 16? What does he tell them? He says, write down these events. Why? Yeah, you want to pass this information on down in history. Why? Yeah, we're going to wipe out the memory of Amalek, right? That's going to be gone. We need to record this. We need to record this event. Why? So that your children and your grandchildren and their grandchildren, and that you and I can read this story. Thousands of years later, here we are reading this story about how God took care of his people on this day. So Moses is told to record these words. So we know very plainly why Moses recorded these words in the book of Exodus, because God told him to. We've asked ourselves a number of times, why did Moses write that down? Why did the children of Israel need to hear that? Well, God tells us very plainly here, doesn't he? Exactly why Moses was to write down these words, so that the children of Israel would be able to read this in their history and remember what God had done for them. Who came to meet Moses? Question number 23. Who came to meet Moses when Israel was camped on the mountain of God? We're in Exodus chapter 18 and verse 1 now. In Exodus chapter 18 and verse 1, who comes out to meet Moses? Jethro, who is his father-in-law, right? Now remember, Moses' family has not been with him. His wife and his children have not been with him. But now here comes Jethro. Here comes Jethro coming out to him when they're camped at the mountain of God in Exodus chapter 18 and verse 1. And who did he bring with him? Zipporah and the two sons. Zipporah, who is Moses' wife, and the two sons. And he brings them out to meet him and brings them to him. And now let's look at Exodus chapter 18, and we'll be reading in verse number 10. Exodus chapter 18 and verse number 10. Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the land of the Egyptians and out of the land of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people." So what was Jethro's conclusion about Jehovah based on what Moses had told him? He is greater than any other god. Now we know that because all those other gods of Egypt were what? They were false gods, right? They were made up. The people made these gods to worship. But this is God. This is the Lord God in heaven, the I am, the Alpha and the Omega, the great God in heaven. And Jethro sees by his action. He's now heard the story. I suspect Moses, what do you think Moses told him that would help him draw this conclusion? Yeah, probably everything that we've read from Exodus chapter 1 to Exodus chapter 17. Moses probably said, look, you got to hear about this. I mean, there was the water, it turned to blood, and there was none to drink. The people had to dig beside the river just to get water to drink, because all the bodies of water turned to blood. And then this is what Pharaoh did. And then he would go on to tell them about the frogs and the lice and the flies and the cattle, the boils, the hail, and the locusts, the dark, the Passover, where the firstborn boys died. Then he would tell them the great story about how they crossed over the Red Sea on dry land, how God provided water, how God provided food, how God provided victory against their armies, against their pursuers. It would cause, yes. Good point. James points out in our reading this week from Acts 14, where Paul comes back and says, hey, let me tell you all that the Lord has done on our missionary journey through you, right? Including them, because they had been a part of that. And that would have been Moses here saying, look, let me tell you everything that the Lord has done. Much like Clarence and Terry and Max, those guys, they go to Africa and they come back and they say, let us tell you all that the Lord has done through our work here in Africa. We're putting together a little letter and package that we're sending off to all of the churches that helped us through the hurricane. Kind of that message. Let us show you all that the Lord has done through you and through your great effort. Not us, but God. I was talking, I think it was my parents were talking last night. I was talking about the hurricane and our recovery here, and I just said, I don't know what we would have done without God. I don't know what we would have done. See Mike sitting back, shake his head. He knows, been through it, right? 40 families in his congregation have been through it. I don't know what we would have done without God. Well, what would these children of Israel have done without God? They'd be slaves in Egypt with no hope of anything. But with God, all things are possible. All things are possible. What seems impossible, possible. God. Yes. Yeah, he certainly might have heard of it, but he might not know if it's true or not true either. I mean, obviously he knew where to find Moses, right? So somehow something would have come to him. But I'm sure hearing it from Moses was just confirmation and him saying, yeah, truly, he repeats back that truly God is, as we read in verse 10 and 11. But then he gives Moses some leadership advice. He sits back and he watches Moses, and Moses is trying to be everything to everybody. He's listening to the big things. He's listening to the little things. And Jethro says, son-in-law, you're going to wear yourself out. You need to spread the wealth here a little bit. What does he tell him to do? Yeah, you need to find some other able men who are leaders. Let them help you. And then you take care of the big stuff, but let them take care of the little stuff. Or else you're not going to be able to survive. No man can do anything on his own. It takes an army of people. It takes multiple people. And that's what the advice Jethro gives. And so what does Moses do? He listens. He says he does, and he does just that. I can't. I can't. I can't. I can't imagine that. Right. They had to meet certain criteria. They had to be wise and able men, right? And certainly among 2,000 men, there would be. Yeah, just like today. There's got to be certain qualifications, right, that a man must be. Very good. Well, we're completely out of time this morning. I appreciate your attention. Uh, Max said we were going to get into lesson 10, but I knew better because we're on my schedule today. He's not here. Don't tell him I said that, okay? But no, we're good. We've got 3 lessons left, and we've got a month left to finish it. But I know Max has got a lot he wants to cover in that last lesson. So we'll hit lesson 10, and we'll hit it running on next Sunday morning, talking about the Israel at Sinai and the 10 Commandments, or the 600 Commandments, or whatever it may be. Okay? All right? So thank you for your attention. We'll see you next Sunday morning. Worship service begins in about 11 minutes.